Hello, hello. It's Eileen here, and I've got a quick update that I wanted to be sure to share with you before we dive into today's episode. The Resilience Room membership community is going to open its doors for new members Monday, July 28th through Friday, August 1st. If you've been thinking of joining us and want to be sure to be notified when we open, I want to encourage you to join the waitlist. You can do that at go.eileendivine.com/resilience room. That's go.eileendivine.com/resilience room. We only open our doors for new members a few times per year, so if you've been thinking about joining, this is a great time for you to do that. We would love nothing more than to welcome you into our amazing community. So again, you can find all the details and join the waitlist at go.eileendivine.com/resilience room. Okay, on to the episode. When a child is settled in their body, when their nervous system is at ease, and experiencing felt safety, when they are seen and they are understood and they're surrounded by expectations that are aligned with how their brain works, that child behaves well. The challenging behavioral symptoms begin to dissipate. Hi there, and welcome to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine, and I am a therapist, parent coach, and educator who supports parents that are raising children, teens, and young adults with brain-based differences and challenging behavioral symptoms. If you are a parent or caregiver of a child who has intense, confusing, relentless, or sometimes even scary behaviors, you are in the right place, and I am so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine, and today I'm going to dive into 5 misconceptions that I hear frequently about parenting from a brain first lens. These misconceptions, they do not surprise me at all when I hear them come up, and I actually expect them to, at some point, come up with the parents that I work with, because it is a completely normal part of shifting our lens from a behavioral lens, which again is all most of us have ever known, to a brain first lens. I'm fairly certain that nearly every parent I've worked with has, at one point or another, asked some version of this question. But how do I know if this behavior is really about my child's brain difference or if they're doing it on purpose? So, as many of you know, I'm the parent of a teenager who lives with a significant brain-based difference. So I understand where that question comes from. It's a deeply ingrained part of our humanness that we want to make sense of what we see, and we want to have certainty in our conclusions about it. So this, paired with the reality that we live in a society where behavior is viewed as unquestionably willful and intentional, it makes it difficult to even imagine that behavior is anything but purposeful. So if that's a question that you've asked or you've struggled with, you are not alone, and it makes all the sense in the world that you may experience some internal resistance as you do the work to shift your lens to thinking brain first. So, to hopefully help ease some of that internal resistance, I want to touch on these 5 common misconceptions that I have heard repeatedly over the years about parenting and supporting kids from a brain first lens. And my hope is that it helps you settle into this way of seeing your child a bit more deeply, and it helps you grow more confident in the wisdom of this model and how to apply it to your relationship with your complex child. All right, so misconception number one. Misconception number one is that parenting from a brain first lens means I'm allowing or giving into behavior that I know is inappropriate, detrimental, or intentionally defiant. So it's basically the fear that we are giving in to bad behavior by parenting from this lens. So let's take a step back and talk about the traditional approach to behavior change. The traditional approach to behavior change, whether it's in parenting or in a professional role, it tells us that when you see a behavior from your child that is disrespectful or inappropriate, that it is definitely, without a doubt, willful and intentional. So this traditional behavioral lens approach, it also tells us that we must address it immediately. We have to address it in that moment, or else that child or that teen will never learn that they cannot behave that way. And worse, they will begin to believe that they can act this way at any time without any fear of consequences. So let me begin by saying that supporting a child from a brain first lens is never an excuse for inappropriate, disrespectful, or destructive behavior. So when a child punches a hole in a wall, that is not okay. When they yell hurtful, awful things at you, definitely not okay. I think we can all agree on that. This approach does, however, encourage us to address that behavior differently when it does happen. And the reason for this has everything to do with what is happening inside your child's brain and their nervous system in that moment that the inappropriate or disrespectful or destructive behavior took place. So the first step here is to try to get some space between that behavior and your reaction to it so that you can consider what is happening from this brain first lens. If behaviors are a symptom of a child's distress, it's reflection of their overwhelm, well, then we need to know the reason why they are experiencing such a high level of distress and overwhelm that they acted in that way that was so hurtful or so disruptive. That begins with connecting what happened to the way in which their brain functions differently. And then from there, addressing the root cause of that challenging behavioral symptom. When we follow that approach consistently, we find that we're working smarter, not harder, and we begin to see those defensive, challenging behaviors dissipate in intensity and in frequency over time. So the second piece of this is circling back. So this process of circling back at a later time, carving out space to talk with your child or your teen about the behavior and what the heck happened, right? Versus insisting that that conversation happen in that heated moment. So I know this urge to get into it with them, right? Immediately, because what happened was just so not okay. So believe me when I say I know what that urge feels like. But here's the thing. There are reasons rooted in neuroscience research why addressing behaviors in the heat of the moment fails to work with a child who has neurobehavioral differences, making the circling back necessary. It has everything to do with, you probably guessed it, what those in-the-moment conversations require of their brain and their nervous system. So if you're not familiar with what I mean by circling back, I will add a link in the show notes for this episode to a blog post so you can read more about that. All right, the second misconception about what it means to parent from a brain first lens is this. If I parent my child through a brain first lens, they will never learn how to live in the quote unquote real world. So this is a big one, especially for parents of older kids, say teenagers especially who are approaching that legal adult status. Parenting through a brain first lens means we recognize that the architecture of our child's brain has been changed. It's been changed in some way, and because of this, it functions differently than we expected. This change in architecture of the brain means they have a physical disability or difference of their body with behavioral symptoms. And because they have a physical disability or difference, we need to provide them with accommodations, just as we would for any other individual living with a physical disability. So this not only helps reduce their behavioral symptoms, but it is the right and the fair and the just thing to do. So with this in mind, what does it mean for someone with a physical disability or difference of any kind to live in the quote-unquote real world? Do they, at a certain age, grow out of their disability? Does it mean that all of a sudden, at a certain age, they no longer require accommodations? Are they seen as lazy or irresponsible simply because the permanent disability they live with still impacts their daily life even as an adult and may require ongoing accommodations? Of course not. The same logic is applied to individuals with brain-based differences, which are often invisible disabilities, which is where things get tricky, right? So kids like yours and mine, they live in the quote-unquote real world every day. And the real world has the responsibility to recognize their differences and accommodate them. Again, it's what's just and right and fair. So believe me when I say that I know this can be a hard one for parents, because what is oftentimes behind this misconception, again, if I parent my child through a brain first lens, they will never learn how to live in the real world. What's behind that typically is fear. How are they going to survive a world that is just not set up for them? And it's a valid fear, but letting fear drive your behavior, which can look like pushing and trying to control, or maybe even shaming or consequencing, that is going to lead you to burnout and a ruptured relationship with your child. Parenting from a brain first lens leads you down a very different path, which actually supports the very growth you so desperately want to see with your child or your teen. Okay, misconception number 3. If I parent my child from a brain first lens, then I'm saying that I no longer have expectations for them or their behavior. This is another big one. So let's break it down a bit. When you parent from a brain first lens, you recognize the ways in which your child's brain works differently due to their brain-based difference. So concretely, this means there are cognitive skills that are required of them to navigate their day successfully, many of which they are likely lagging behind in comparison to where we expected them to be at their chronological age. And in order to align tasks and expectations with the way their brain functions, we have to adjust some of those previously held expectations. So adjusting your expectations does not mean you are giving in or deciding that you, as a parent, no longer have expectations for your child. We've talked about this on this podcast before. Giving in is what we default to in the moment when we feel worn down by a behavior and we don't know what else to do. Adjusting expectations, again, based on your child's unique brain and their fragile nervous system, that is a thoughtful practice that you are in charge of, you are the decision maker on. It is a process that is loving, that is generous, and it's an amazing accommodation. So if you haven't listened to episode 9 of this podcast, it's called Let Go of the Fear That You're Over Accommodating. And I'd encourage you to give that one a listen when you're done with this one. It really speaks to this specific misconception. Misconception number 4. This misconception is, if I do not show my child that I am in charge by addressing the behavior the moment it takes place, I will lose my parental authority and my child will believe they can walk all over me whenever they feel like it. I touched on this misconception in misconception number 1, but it's such a big one and it comes up so frequently that it deserves its own special attention. So let's talk again for a moment what the traditional parenting models tell us to do. Traditional parenting models that rely on a behavioral lens, they lead us to believe that we must parent from an authoritarian position. And if we don't, chaos will ensue. We are taught that we should do this in a variety of ways. So rewards and punishments, consequences, withholding or taking away valued items or experiences, raising our voices, lecturing, even shaming our kids. We become convinced, because it is the dominant narrative in our society, that if we do not lead with our power and our control, then our child's behavior will get progressively worse, and they will believe they can do whatever they want, and they will take full advantage of us and the situation. So no wonder this is such a big misconception. That sounds like a terrible way to live as a parent, and it is also the dominant narrative in our society. Again, there's lots of fear behind this, right? So this is a good time to ground ourselves in the knowledge that the Brain First approach relies on neuroscience and the relational sciences to shed light on the most effective ways to view issues of behavior management and quote unquote compliance. It recognizes what research has taught us about the importance of connection and relationship, felt safety, co-regulation. It tells us clearly what it means to have a brain that has been impacted in some way and needs accommodations. It reminds us that all of these things are not a reward to be given only if a child behaves. They are biological imperatives. They are the foundational pieces that need to be in place so that a child can be less symptomatic, which means they experience less defensive, challenging behaviors. The Brain First approach helps us understand what Dr. Ross Greene says, that kids would do better if they could. And so if they are not doing well, if they're experiencing challenging, defensive behavioral symptoms, then there is more for us as the adults to be curious about in terms of what is behind those challenging behaviors. When a child is settled in their body, when their nervous system is at ease and experiencing felt safety, when they are seen and they are understood and they're surrounded by expectations that are aligned with how their brain works, that child behaves well. The challenging behavioral symptoms begin to dissipate. The truth is that our kids, they know that we, meaning the adults in the room, they already know that we're in charge. And what I would say is, we don't need to take an authoritarian approach to reemphasize that. They know that we're in charge when they can observe and feel our reliable regulation. They need to feel understood, connected to us, and able to rely on us for that co-regulated support when they are having a difficult time. All right, we are up to the last misconception about what it means to parent from a Brain First lens. Misconception number 5, here it is. Parenting from a Brain First lens sounds like a lot of work, and I'm already exhausted. I simply cannot add another thing to my plate. So this is what I want you to hear and to remember in those hard moments. You are already working hard enough. And of course, you are exhausted. It can be devastating, both emotionally and physically, when your child is experiencing challenging behaviors every single day and you feel like nothing works, even though you're working so hard. It's even more devastating and exhausting, demoralizing maybe, when we are told by others that our children will grow out of it, or they simply need more consequences or harsher punishment. Or even worse, when you are told that as their parent, you aren't working hard enough to get them under control, that this is a boundaries issue, right? You're not doing your job well enough as a parent. Here's what I have learned. Without a doubt, by parenting from this lens for more than a dozen years now in my own home, and from walking alongside thousands of parents at this point, parenting from a Brain First lens, it is not about working harder than you already are. I would never tell a parent that I was working with, you need to work harder. They are absolutely working hard enough already. It's about taking all of that energy that you're already expending and shifting the way in which you use it to support your child, putting it somewhere different so that you can finally begin to see things improve. see things improve with your child and their behavior, in your relationship with them, and in your home. And of course, of equal importance within yourself, you deserve to have a sense of internal peace and calm. If you've had some questions about parenting from this Brain First lens, I really hope this episode on these 5 big and common misconceptions has helped you. Thanks as always for being here, and until next time, take care. Before we say goodbye, I want to be sure that you are aware of all the free resources I've created with you and parents like you in mind. You can access them all in one place at go.eileendivine.com/free resources.